The invitation arrived in a shimmer of blue light above the worn wooden table in the farmhouse kitchen. Alara's mother was kneading bread when the holographic seal of Orion Corp appeared, casting its cold glow across the room. For a moment, no one moved. The symbol was unmistakable. The ringed star of the galaxy's most powerful tech conglomerate, a company that had never once spared a glance toward their small agricultural planet of Thalen Prime. Alara wiped her hands on her apron and leaned closer, her heart pounding. The message was formal, clipped, written in the corporate tongue of executives who never got dirt under their nails. You have been shortlisted for the position of Quantum Systems Analyst. The final interview will take place at Orion Corp headquarters, Skyreach Tower, Neo Terra. The words seemed surreal, almost mocking. Alara had applied weeks ago, half in defiance, half in hope, knowing well the odds were impossible. Orion only recruited from elite academies, graduates polished in orbital universities where tuition cost more than her entire farmstead was worth. Her father, a quiet man weathered by sun and storms, shook his head slowly. This must be a mistake. His voice carried the same disbelief Alara felt pressing in on her chest. She was a farmer's daughter, raised among machines that broke more often than they worked, fixing them with scavenged parts and stubborn will. She didn't have a degree, didn't have connections. What she had was nights spent decoding rusting tech manuals salvaged from the junkyard, teaching herself to bend quantum processors into tasks they had never been designed for. What she had was necessity. I don't think it's a mistake, Alara murmured, her fingers brushing the air where the words still hovered. Her stomach turned as excitement warred with dread. Orion wasn't just a company. It was power itself, spanning hundreds of worlds, dictating the future of trade, science, even agriculture. And its CEO, Dorian Vale, was infamous. She had seen him in broadcasts, handsome in a sharp-edged, clinical way, his voice dripping with superiority. He spoke of progress and vision, but always with the undertone that only he and his kind truly understood those words. For him, people like Alara didn't exist, except as statistics to be filed under unskilled labor. The journey to Neo Terra was long. Alara sold one of their last functioning crop drones to pay for a shuttle ticket. As she sat in the cramped passenger cabin, watching stars bleed past the window, she clutched her battered datapad like a talisman. It held years of her work, notes, blueprints, improvised algorithms, fixes she had designed when no one else could help. She didn't know if any of it would matter in the sleek corridors of Orion, but it was all she had. When the shuttle docked at Skyreach Station, Alara stepped out into a world that felt carved from light and glass. Towers rose into the stratosphere, their surfaces gleaming like liquid metal, and skybridges crisscrossed above her like threads of a spider's web. The air hummed with energy from anti-grav transports, and polished executives in silver thread suits streamed past without a glance. She walked among them in her plain clothes, her boots scuffed from the farm, and felt their eyes skim over her as though she were invisible. Inside Skyreach Tower, Orion's headquarters, everything seemed designed to intimidate. Hollow screens floated above marble floors, displaying cascading streams of data incomprehensible to most, but to Alara they were like patterns of rainfall on soil, predictable, decipherable. The receptionist, sleek and smiling, raised a perfectly arched brow at her name, then gestured for her to wait. The chairs were molded from some expensive polymer that adjusted automatically to posture. Alara sat stiffly, ignoring the subtle stares from other candidates who carried themselves with the polished ease of academy elites. Their conversations hummed with references to professors, simulations, internships aboard research stations. One of them glanced at her calloused hands and smirked. At last, an aide escorted her into the elevator. The higher it climbed, the more her ears popped until the doors slid open to reveal a floor walled entirely in glass. The city sprawled far below, ships darting like silver insects between towers. And there, at the long obsidian table, sat Dorian Vale. He looked exactly as he did on the broadcasts, immaculate suit, hair slicked back, a faint, cutting smile that seemed permanently etched on his lips. Around him, members of the Orion board lounged in ergonomic chairs, their gazes sharp, assessing. The air smelled faintly of ozone and cold steel. Alara of Thalen Prime, Dorian drawled, his voice smooth but laced with disdain. A farmer's daughter. The words dripped with amusement, as if her presence were a clever joke. He steepled his fingers and tilted his head. You do realize this position requires mastery of quantum systems, not tractor maintenance. The board chuckled softly, a chorus of polite derision. Alara met his gaze without flinching. Her palms were damp, but her voice came steady. On Thalen Prime, a broken tractor means no harvest. A broken harvester means famine. We couldn't afford replacements. We had to rebuild, recalibrate, reprogram. Every season brought a new failure to overcome. If you want to talk about quantum systems, I can tell you how to run a bio-AI weather modulator on half its original code while keeping a crop alive in a dust storm. The laughter around the table dimmed, curiosity flickering in a few eyes. Dorian's smile tightened, though he masked it quickly. He leaned back, regarding her as though she were a puzzle piece that didn't quite fit. Charming, he said coolly. But charm does not equate to skill. Tell me, do you truly believe someone of your upbringing can stand against graduates who have dedicated their lives to this science? Alara took a breath, steadying the racing of her heart. She thought of the nights under Thalen's twin moons, soldering broken wires by lantern light, rewriting lines of code until her vision blurred. She thought of her people, scraping survival out of machinery Orion had abandoned decades ago. She thought of the fact that if she failed here, she would return with nothing, no job, no hope of lifting her family from the slow decline of their farm. I don't believe it, she said softly. Her gaze held his, unyielding. I know it. The silence that followed was sharp, heavy. For the first time, the board members leaned forward, intrigued. And though Dorian's expression did not change, a flicker of something, irritation, perhaps unease, passed behind his eyes. Alara sat straighter in her chair. Whatever happened next, she would not let them break her. She had come all this way for a chance, and she wasn't about to bow to a man who thought soil beneath fingernails was weakness instead of proof of strength. The room felt colder the longer Alara sat there. The walls of glass gave no sense of shelter, only the dizzying perspective of a city stretched endlessly below, alive with glittering traffic streams and hovering billboards. The board members arranged themselves like predators in a half-circle, their tailored suits shimmering faintly in the filtered light. At the center, Dorian Vale exuded the kind of arrogance that came from years of being obeyed without question. He had the faint smirk of a man convinced he already knew the outcome. Alara of Thalen Prime, he began, his voice sharp and polished. We'll test your resourcefulness. I trust you won't be offended if my questions appear more advanced than what you are accustomed to. After all, our usual candidates come from institutions you would not even be permitted to enter. Laughter rippled around the table again, but this time Alara did not look away. She felt the heat in her chest, but she drew it inward, cooling it into focus. When Dorian gestured for her to speak, she leaned forward just slightly, resting her calloused hands on the smooth table surface. Ask, she said simply. Dorian's eyes narrowed with faint irritation at her composure. Fine, let's start with a basic scenario. If you were tasked with recalibrating a quantum-linked relay chain suffering from desynchronization drift, how would you proceed? He folded his hands together, watching as though expecting her to choke on the jargon. Alara thought for a moment, picturing not the pristine diagrams from textbooks she never had, but the ragged network of irrigation relays across the parched valleys of Thalen Prime. First, she said slowly, I'd isolate the node causing the delay. Drift is rarely symmetrical. Then I'd override its clock cycle manually and anchor it to the most stable adjacent node. After that, I'd reinforce synchronization using a bootstrap loop, like adjusting rainfall across a valley by changing only one tributary. The flow corrects itself if you nudge the right point. The board went quiet. A few eyebrows rose. The metaphor was rustic, but the method was sound. Dorian waved a hand, brushing it aside. Anyone can memorize procedure. Let's raise the stakes. Imagine your relay chain is embedded within a dynamic atmospheric modulator. A storm approaches. The system must adapt in real time or collapse entirely. What then? His tone dripped with mockery, as though daring her to falter. But Alara's lips curved faintly. She remembered the screaming winds of Thalen's dust season, the way her people had once watched a year's work nearly die overnight. You don't fight the storm, she said. You ride it. I'd switch the modulator into predictive mode, but widen its tolerance range so it bends instead of resists. Storms are chaotic, yes, but they follow patterns. The trick is to find the rhythm hidden in the noise. On Thalen, I learned that if you study a storm long enough, you realize it always repeats. Gust, pause, shift, surge. I'd code the system to anticipate the rhythm instead of resisting every gust. A murmur rippled through the room. The board members exchanged glances. She had described, in plain words, an elegant solution to a problem that had cost Orion millions in research. Dorian's smile thinned. He leaned back, his chair whispering against the floor. You speak as though storms are puzzles you've mastered. But tell me, do you really equate playing with weather toys on a farm to handling data streams worth trillions? Alara met his gaze evenly. Yes, because when I fail, people starve. That makes the stakes higher than your data streams. Her voice was calm, but the quiet conviction carried through the glass-walled chamber. For a heartbeat, silence stretched taut. One of the older board members coughed softly, adjusting his collar. Another scribbled something quickly on a digital slate. Dorian pressed on, his pride clearly pricked. Let us speak of encryption. Orion's core servers use layered quantum entanglement ciphers, nearly unbreakable. Suppose you discovered a breach. How would you seal it before critical loss occurred? His tone was sharp, baited with challenge. Alara leaned back this time, considering. I'd stop trying to seal it from the outside. By then, you've already lost time. Instead, I'd mirror the breach, give it what it wants, let it consume a decoy loop. Seeded with false patterns. While it's busy drowning itself in garbage, I'd patch the real gap from the inside out. Like drawing a pest away from your crops with bait grain so you can fix the broken fence in peace. A low whistle slipped from one board member before he caught himself. Others nodded imperceptibly, impressed despite themselves. Dorian's jaw tightened. You seem to think farming and corporate science are interchangeable, he said coldly. But these are not the same. No, Alara replied softly, her voice cutting through the air. On your worlds, failure means lost profit. On mine, it means lost lives. That forces us to innovate faster, with fewer tools, with no safety net. You call that primitive, I call it efficient. The tension in the room shifted. What had begun as entertainment, an arrogant CEO trying to humiliate a girl from the soil, was becoming something else. The board no longer looked at Alara as an amusement. They studied her as one might study a new piece of technology that promised to rewrite the rules. Dorian felt the shift, and it unsettled him. He tapped a finger on the table, as though to reassert control. You're clever, he said finally, the word bitten off like it tasted sour. But cleverness alone does not build empires. Alara's gaze held his steadily. Maybe not, but it saves them when they're crumbling. The boardroom went still again. Outside, the city glittered, its lights reflecting in the glass walls like constellations. Inside, a farmer's daughter and a corporate titan faced each other across the obsidian table, their clash no longer one of mockery, but of something deeper, a battle between two ways of understanding the universe. For the first time since she walked into the room, Alara felt the smallest shift in her favor. They had come expecting to laugh at her. Instead, she had made them listen. And though Dorian Vale sat with his smile carved like stone, Alara saw the flicker of unease in his eyes. He had underestimated her, and he knew it.